The Cleric is the token support class of Dark and Darker, being the backbone of their group. With a blunt-focused kit, a useful assortment of spells, and an odd affinity for targeting the undead, it's a wonderful class that, when played well, earns its keep in most, if not all, groups. Today, we're going to go over every aspect of this class in depth to leave you with all the information you need to keep your squadmates alive. Depending on how old this video is, some values may have changed, but the general guidance here should stand the test of time. With that being said, let's get right to it. As a cleric, you're primarily a support class. This involves helping your allies or yourself by casting healing, protective, and buff spells. However, you'll also have lots of tools enchanted with Smite 5 from Minecraft, meaning you'll deal extra damage to the undead. Unfortunately, this is at the expense of your base stats. Your attack speed, interaction speed, and damage bonus are all lowered. Besides your passive bonuses, you also have access to 4 skills, of which 2 can be equipped. Spell Memory. Probably the most necessary of the bunch, this skill allows you to actually utilize all of your spells. Without Spell Memory, you simply won't have access to the assortment of spells which make up your identity as a support class. Judgment. A homing attack that deals 30 magic damage and reduces the movement speed on the target for 2 seconds. To cast, however, requires the cleric to stand still for half a second. The range is also limited to 4.5 meters. Some interesting notes. If the target moves out of range while you're casting, Judgment will miss, but still go on cooldown. This skill is also incredibly useful as a utility tool to discover invisible players, as you'll be notified when no target is found, and the cooldown only activates on a successful use of the skill. Holy Purification. A PvE-focused skill, which is an area of effect centered on the cleric which deals 100 base magical damage to all undead within 7.5 meters. Turning yourself into a holy nuke may be effective, but unlike Judgment, you can't use this skill on enemy players. With an increased cast time as well, you'll be pressed to find a best use case for it. Smite. A skill that increases damage dealt by plus 10 for 7 seconds upon use. This skill isn't particularly powerful, but if you happen to be overly fond of your melee weapon for some reason, it pairs well. It does, however, help that, like Judgment, this affects both players and AI. On top of the 2 skills you've equipped, after leveling up to 15, you can further augment your build with up to 4 perks. Advanced Healer increases your base heal by 5. This is an objective improvement which improves your healing, with the base heal of Lesser Heal recovering 15 health. This means that you'll be healing 20 health instead, per cast. Advanced Healer also stacks with our next perk, Kindness. Self-heals for 15% when healing another player. This perk is truly fitting for the support archetype, as you'll be able to mitigate any chip damage that you've taken throughout your run simply by doing your job. Next, Blunt Weapon Mastery. This perk increases attack power by 5% when attacking with a blunt weapon. This perk definitely isn't the most popular, but if you're really going for all-out damage, especially in PvP, it may be your only option. Further on, we have Perseverance. Perseverance reduces all types of incoming damage by 3. While a flat rate reduction on incoming damage sounds great, the reduction is fairly low. As with Blunt Weapon Mastery, if you're simply looking for an objective improvement to your character with little thought required, this works fine. Protection from Evil reduces the duration of harmful damage over time effects by 50%. There are lots of different status effects in the game, and cutting their duration in half is a pretty simple yet impactful use of the perk. They say not to plan for failure, but things go south all the time. For this reason, Requiem exists. Requiem allows you to revive an ally with 25% HP, and negates the health loss penalty when reviving an ally at an altar. Me personally, I don't let allies die on my watch, but you do you. If you're feeling frisky, you can equip Brewmaster. Brewmaster allows you to drink ale without experiencing the drunk visual effects. Like Protection from Evil, this perk is pretty situational, but if you're one of those guys that wants to make the build entirely surrounding the consumption of ale, you wouldn't be the first. Finally, we have Undead Slaying. As simple as it gets, this perk grants you a 20% damage bonus against undead enemies. As you'd expect me to say, you should probably take this if you'd like to focus on PvE, and disregard it otherwise. Although, pairing this with Blunt Weapon Mastery and some decent gear may make for exceptional damage. With all of that out of the way, let's talk about what makes you valuable to your team. Your spells. To utilize your spells, you'll need to have the Memory skill equipped. which it is by default. Next, you'll need to use your Catalyst, which by default will be your secondary, the Wizard Staff. The spells available to you as a cleric are all about supporting your allies while they do the heavy lifting. Something to note. Unlike with other games that have supporting/healer roles, Dark and Darker actually demands a level of mechanical skill to properly utilize your spells. Be careful where you aim your magic, as missing your ally could end up by your casting these helpful spells on an enemy. Spells can also be recharged at campfires. The knowledge system will determine which spells you can take, with each spell's cost being based on a tier system with rising costs for higher tier spells. I won't go in depth into the system as I already have a previous video on it, but to sum it up, the more impactful a spell is, the more knowledge it will require to equip. Consider equipping gear with knowledge on it to take multiple high tier spells simultaneously. Starting with the most basic spell, Lesser Heal. This spell heals a target for 15 HP and can also be cast onto yourself. Make sure to properly aim the spell, as if you miss your ally, it will heal yourself, or even heal the enemy if you happen to be aiming at them. Holy Light is Lesser Heal's more attractive cousin. Casting this spell will either heal an ally for 30 HP or deal 100 base magic damage to undead. Holy Light is best used in fights, as it heals significantly more HP than Lesser Heal. However, this spell cannot self-cast. Protection is a simple yet powerful spell, which creates a shield around an ally that blocks 20 physical damage for 20 seconds. This spell could be great to reinforce the vanguard of any attempted push, and like Lesser Heal, can be self-cast to protect yourself as well. Because of the short duration, however, it's best to use protection at the opportune moment. Sanctuary creates a field around the caster that heals friendly beings within the area by 7 HP per second while also dealing 14 spell damage per second to undead. This spell also heals the caster, but unfortunately prevents the user from moving when cast. The spell can be cancelled to restore movement, but this will consume the spell charge and cancel the rest of its duration. Overall, Sanctuary provides a massive amount of healing, but is held back by a steep knowledge cost and its lack of mobility. Bless allows you to improve all the primary attributes of a target by +5 for 30 seconds. Unfortunately, this spell falls flat compared to the other support spells, but it isn't inherently bad. In the heat of battle, you'll only have so much time to cast a limited amount of spells, and Bless is less impactful than Protection or Holy Light, but if you happen to have the time, this can be an inoffensive buff that you cast before entering battle. Divine Strike increases weapon damage of the target for 10 seconds. This can be best cast on other players alongside yourself. Just like Bless, this is net profit with very little reason not to use it. Bind keeps the target from moving for 0.75 seconds. This is a pretty high skill spell which requires great coordination with your group to properly utilize it. Since the spell lasts for less than half a second, if your teammates aren't ready for the cast, then it may as well have been useless. Cleanse is a pretty nifty tool spell which just removes all harmful magical effects from the target. Most of the other spells are much more useful than Cleanse, but it's still pretty cheap to equip, so that's something. Lastly, Resurrection. This spell does what you would expect, allowing you to resurrect an ally who has fallen without bringing their soul to an altar. The cast time on this spell is incredibly long, and you can't move while casting. Also, if you cancel the cast, it will consume your one and only charge. The spell is also incredibly loud, so keep that in mind when casting. All of these spells have their purpose, even if some of them will be used more often than others. Ration your spells carefully, and be sure not to miss. Despite the fact that you are primarily a support class, you do have access to a few melee weapons, along with 2 catalysts. Starting with the primaries, your first option, which will be given to you by default, is the Flanged Mace. This is a one-handed blunt weapon which has an attack pattern of only overheads. Since headshots deal more damage, this is ideal, allowing you to put out optimal damage with low risk of hitting your allies. Next, the Morningstar, another one-handed blunt weapon. This is not a starting weapon, so it must be purchased or found in the dungeon. The attack pattern is made up of mostly overheads and a horizontal swing. This pattern, more varied than the Flanged Mace, but passes through enemies much easier. It also hits harder at the cost of attack speed. The War Maul is an extremely slow, two-handed blunt weapon which cannot be paired with a shield. Unfortunately, due to it being limited to wide horizontal swings, it's also difficult to handle in narrow hallways. Recently, the War Maul was given an alternate attack combination which provides a much more precise, swift pattern at the cost of range. Besides highly specialized clerics with a hyper-specific build, this weapon does not have much utility for most cleric gameplay. The newest weapon the cleric has access to is the quarterstaff. This is a fairly mediocre two-handed blunt weapon which cannot be paired with a shield. The attack pattern involves an overhead followed up by 45-degree horizontal slashes. This is a complex weapon with a confusing attack pattern, so be wary. Moving on to the secondaries, the cleric can use one of two catalysts. The default catalyst is the wizard staff. The staff is a tool which fulfills its function, allowing you to cast your spells while also doubling as a mediocre melee weapon if need be. Though, due to its size, the staff can snag on world geometry when casting a spell, which will interrupt the cast. Next, there's the spellbook. The spellbook allows for slightly faster movement speed than the staff on top of having a smaller profile, which makes it more difficult to snag and be interrupted. Unfortunately, this is at the expense of its utility as a melee weapon, but most likely if you were casting spells, that wasn't too important anyway. As a cleric, you're the backbone of your team, the healer, everyone's best friend. It's your responsibility to keep your allies alive by augmenting them before engagements and healing them when injured. Your relatively low base stats dictate that you should play conservatively in the backline while casting spells on your allies as you see fit. Before a battle starts, consider using Bless, Protection, or both. While in a fight, keep them alive by healing them, primarily with Holy Light. Make sure you aim correctly, as any missed cast will waste time. You'll also need to ensure your own safety, using proper spatial awareness and game sense. Don't let any dastardly rogue sneak up on you, and be sure to maintain your composure when the enemy squads inevitably start targeting you. You'll need to place yourself in a favorable position, which allows you to support your allies with spells while simultaneously preventing the enemies from rushing you. When it comes to supporting your teammates with damage, Judgment would be your best bet. Your actual melee damage isn't impressive enough to justify putting yourself in danger, and with Judgment's ability to dish out a swift, unavoidable attack, it can be a great finisher on an already injured enemy. In regards to applying buffs before or during fights, you'll need to micromanage yourself and your abilities. If your gameplay is sufficient, you'll find yourself, along with your squad, actually winning multiple fights. In this case, be sure to communicate with your allies about your remaining spell supply and what it means for your strategy in your next engagements. If time allows it, you can also rest up at a campfire to restore your spells. Now you have all the info you need, and we've covered all the basics. You're ready to support your squad as the glue that holds your two idiot teammates together. Best of luck in there.